Hello and welcome everyone to today's meeting of Perth and Kinross Council's Learning and Families Committee. And before I ask for apologies from the clerk, I'd just like to welcome everybody as usual, but particularly Aaron Singh, who's our strategic lead for children, families and justice. It's Aaron's first formal committee, so welcome. Any apologies, Danny, please?
Yes, thanks, convener. Afternoon, everyone. We've got a few apologies from some of our non-elected members. Margaret Conroy, Tim Kearns and Miranda Powell have all submitted apologies. Adrian Ferguson is with us now, but I think, Adrian, you've indicated you might need to leave at some point. You're here, you're definitely here, yeah, but so I think so that's my my apologies there. I just we've got a full complement of members as far as I can see, convener, but I'll just check with the members that are joining us online, if that's okay, that they're in the meeting with us. So, Councillor Freshwater.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Kigali.
Present, yes.
Provost.
Good afternoon, present.
And Councillor Shires.
Present.
Okay, so that's yeah, so let's speed there.
Thank you, Danny. We have some minutes here that if there are any comment or concerns about the minutes, let's hear them out. Otherwise, can we approve previous minutes as listed? Comment, please, Bailey Hearn.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, my comment is not necessarily on the content in a minute. It's an observation that the last meeting of this committee was on the 25th of October last year. That's a 5-month break. When you look at the calendar for the rest of the year, we're going into two months between committees, 3 months between committees, then 2 months, then into another 5 months. That doesn't give very good timing for scrutiny. It doesn't give good timing to bring reports to the committee, and I'll be mentioning that again later on one of the papers. I just wonder why we've got that long break and why we've broken from tradition to have one of the major committees on a Monday and not a Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey Hearn, actually, I should say. You're right, and I think it's just the way it's fallen to some degree, but it's noted it is too long between committees. It certainly caught me out when we assumed that we would have Hazel here, and of course actually the length of time was such that Hazel Robertson wasn't here for our last committee and we weren't able to do a valedictory. So you're right, it's certainly something that's noted. I think it's just the way, I don't think there's been anything malicious in it. It's the way the timetables have worked out, and we will make sure it doesn't happen again. Danny?
Yeah, thanks, Bailey Hearn. It's nothing much more to add really than what a convener said. We will take that away and note that certainly, but I mean, it's a timetable as approved by council. So I think maybe that'd be the more appropriate setting for timetable and issues, but it's certainly something I will take away and note your comments on that.
Provost, would you like to comment, please?
Thanks, convener. Yeah, just to provide further information to Bailey Ahern in relation to his query. Obviously, the council calendar is set by council and is done in consultation both with officers, conveners and all members and all parties, and very much happy to take away his suggestion about the fact that there does seem to be an extraordinarily long gap, and I'm not quite sure why that happened, but I think possibly it was in relation to the need to have full council and the budget council so close together this year that has knocked some other committees slightly out of their place in the sync. So happy to take that away and speak to the committee leads around that for next year, but it certainly wasn't malicious and it wasn't something done by the convener who was consulted along with the strategic lead, but only on the timings, not on the number of committees, etc. So just wanted to provide that extra information, convener.
Thanks, Provost. Much appreciated. I think you're probably right though, Bailey Ahern. 5 months is too long, and we had to look at that. So noted. Thank you. Beyond that, can we agree the minutes as listed on the agenda? Thank you. I'm going to pass straight away on to Councillor Carr, actually, to take the paper 4 on community learning and development. Councillor Carr, please.
Convener, paper 4 is the outstanding business statement, which I've got a question on.
Yeah, apologies. I'm looking at my pre-agenda. Should confess at this point. Comments on outstanding business statement then, please.
Thank you, convener. It's with regards to the update. I mean, there's a couple of questions here. Is why are we having such a difficult time trying to get a parent rep and a youth rep? And if this is outstanding business, I don't see why it's taken off the outstanding business. We need to be reminded that it's outstanding. That's what this document's for. So to remove an outstanding business off this document because we haven't fulfilled it doesn't make any sense. But I'd also like to find out, and somebody can answer, why we're having such a difficult time getting the parent and youth reps.
I'll come to Danny as to why we can't get parent and youth reps. The reason I suggested it's taken off is it just feels like it's a bit laborious saying every time we can't find anybody. In terms of the reason, I'll pass over to our Danny as clerk. Thanks.
Yes, thanks for your question there, Bailey Ahern. Put quite simply, it's not for a lack of trying. We have made appeals to parent reps or parent councils in this regard, and just in all honesty, struggle for volunteers to come forward. Is, as I say, it's an ongoing process. It's certainly something I'd like to get sorted sooner rather than later. And obviously, it's, you know, for the committee to have its full complement of non-elected members. With regards to youth representatives, sort of in discussions between ourselves and other colleagues across the council, more in regards to the most appropriate means of youth representation on this committee, because obviously, you know, if we have had previously with, you know, youth reps coming and attending the committee, they are taking time out of school, and we're maybe looking at different means of having their sort of voices heard in this forum without maybe having to sort of get them into a meeting and take them out of school. You know, have them taking time out of school on a Monday or Wednesday afternoon. With regards to why we've sort of recommended it be removed from the outstanding business, I totally get and agree with where you're coming from. It is outstanding business, and therefore it was more just for, it's more in terms of we're bringing the same update to yourselves as members time after time, meeting after meeting at the minute, and as the convener said, probably a bit laborious in that sense. So, but it's obviously up for yourselves to agree with you want it kept on the outstanding business statement, or whether you go with the recommendation in there.
I'll come to Sheena in a minute, but you're right. And Councillor Barrett's got a question. I mean, I suggested it was taken off just for ease. I'm certainly not wed to that. If members want it to remain on outstanding business and you want us to tell you the same thing every time, that's fine. However, it should be noted that even if it's taken off the outstanding business statement, that doesn't mean for a second that committee services are going to stop trying to find somebody. And as soon as we do, we'll be put back on to outstanding business statement to say we've found somebody, if that makes sense. But
the only reason I queried it, convener, is the fact that I wasn't on the committee full time in October, and I've joined the committee since then. It's highlighted the issue to me, which means when I go to parent councils now, I've never heard this brought up, which means I can ask the question now at parent councils in the schools that I attend. Has anybody thought about it, and did you know about it? And then hopefully that can fill the place.
Yeah.
But if that hadn't been on there, because you decided to take it off last time, I would never know the issue existed.
No, that's a fair point, and that would be appreciated, Bailey Hearn. I think it is really important that we get as wide a representation as possible. I'm going to come to Sheena Devlin for comment before I come to Councillor Barrett for her question.
Thank you, convener. And Bailey Hearn, I can confirm that at the meetings that we hold twice a year with the chairs of all the parent councils in Perth and Kinross, this has been raised. In fact, Danny and I think Scott Henry have both attended those meetings to try and encourage parental representation, and have unfortunately not, been successful to date, but that doesn't mean to say that they won't still be trying. In terms of the youth voice, for members of the committee who've been on this committee for some time, you will remember that we did have youth representation in the past, and feedback from young people who did attend was that, as Danny's alluded to, one issue for them was the timing of meetings, and that they were not content with taking time out of their studies, whether that was at college or at school, to attend these meetings, and they didn't find that convenient. The other thing, well, there were several other things actually. One was about they just really didn't feel that this was an appropriate forum for them to be in. And that wasn't that they didn't feel that they had things that were appropriate to say and raise. And so they've asked us to be considering how else we might then seek their views and feed that in. And of course, with the legislation that's coming forth in relation to UNCRC, it will mean a look again, not just at papers that come before this committee, but actually papers that become before the council and every committee, in terms of making sure that young people's views are represented. And so we've just decided to try and amalgamate all of that into that wider review that's being led by Sarah Roger. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Sheena. I appreciate what you're doing in terms of involving young people. Like Bailey Ahern, there are 8 schools in my ward. I regularly attend parent councils of 5 of them, and this has never been mentioned at any parent council that I've attended that I can remember. So I don't know if it would be useful perhaps to circulate to members of this committee, or possibly probably members of this committee rather than all councillors, the information that's being provided to potential members as parent representatives, and perhaps we can try and make it more an effort to get some of our parent councils involved and do it that way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Barrett and Bailey Hearn as well. That would certainly be very helpful to ourselves. So I'll be in touch with you after the meeting with that. Thank you.
Yeah, good shout, Councillor Barrett. Thank you. Thank you, Bailey Hearn. Are there any other questions or comments on outstanding business statement? Good. Thank you. Can we agree that's a good it feels like it's a good point, Councillor Duff. It feels like we're minded to keep it on, so let's just keep it on. Thank you, Councillor Duff. If we can therefore agree the outstanding business report, notwithstanding that adjustment, we'll move on to our community learning and development plan, and I'm going to pass on to Councillor Carr. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. For the community learning and development phase 1 report, I'd like to call on Community Service Manager David Stoko to provide an introduction.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This is the phase 1 report for the community learning and development plan, covering the period October 2021 to March 2023. The report sets out the statutory duty to provide community learning development in Perth and Kinross, priorities for the plan, key achievements during this reporting period, and areas for improvement. The report also sets out the priorities for phase 2, which covers April 2023 to March 2024, and gives an overview of locality working and transformation in their respective CLD context. Finally, the report outlines Education Scotland's plans to conduct a progress visit in Perth and Kinross in the spring. Key performance indicators and the detailed phase 1 action plan are contained as appendices to the report. The committee is being asked to note this update, and myself and colleagues in the chamber and Fiona Robertson, who is online, are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Apologies there. We'll have a question from Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've got a question on the dates of this. Phase 1, as you rightly said, was to April 23 or March 23. Why are we getting this a year late? When we're looking at it, because if you look at the report in 547, phase 2 was April 23 to March 24, and that's just completed. So I'm assuming we're going to get a report fairly shortly on phase 2 as well. And when you look at the information and the data, most of it is dated 2022, which quite frankly is pretty much out of date now, as there's a year and a half in between that data and now. So I just wonder why there was such a long time and why this report has come before us now when we should be getting the report for phase 2 shortly.
No, thanks for the question, Billy, and I accept that the report is late. So the reporting period did end, as you say, March last year. At that time, I was delivering the Cooper Angus Action Plan and also the Physical Activity and Sports Strategy. So I was heavily involved in those, which meant just being able to pull this final report together. It took longer than it should. We did narrowly miss the October meeting, and as you say, we would be looking to bring the progress, the phase 2 progress report to committee much sooner, as that finishes this month.
We also have Fiona Robertson.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Yes, Bailey Ahern, I mean, David has covered this. The reality is simply pressure and priorities of workload on what is a fairly small team. We did have a big piece of work last year in relation to the Cooper Angus action plan, which was developed in response to a number of issues which had emerged within that community. We also had other key strategies and plans, some of which had got a little bit log-jammed during COVID, but included the cultural strategy, the physical activity and sports strategy. So ideally, we would have delivered this to you sooner. David will probably go on to cover in other questions what the priorities are for the next phase of the action plan. A lot of the information in this report, as you say, does relate to events, tasks and activities which are now concluded, but still important for the committee to see that and to get a formal record of what has been achieved since 2022-23.
Thank you, Fiona. If that answers your question, Billy Ahern, we'll move on to a question from Councillor Cuthbert.
It's working. Yeah, thank you, Vice Convener. I read this report, I think 3 times now. I find the whole area to be it's a cluttered landscape, if I can use that expression. There appear to be all sorts of other services involved. You've got the Health and Social Care Partnership, you've got PCAVs, you've got all sorts of different bodies. What I would ask for is whether we can have a sort of interactive briefing at some point where we actually go through all the structure to how it's working, if you like. The other thing is that there is a self-evaluation being completed. I would welcome sight of that, or an opportunity to go through it with the officers, just so I can get a better feel of just what is working and what isn't working. Can those be delivered?
I'll pass over.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. I mean, I would think as convener, if there's a desire for that, then I'm fairly sure we can deliver that, and absolutely. So yes is the straight answer.
So can I just add to the question in terms of you talked about structures, and traditionally CLD was collectively in one service, but and this is not uncommon. Most other local authorities, we talk more about functions. So it's really what we'd like to frame this as in the future is more as a partnership, because there are a number of council services working with communities, working with volunteers. Collectively, we commission quite a lot of services from third sector groups as well. So it's important that they're reflected in the work. So, but yeah, so certainly if it'd be helpful for us to set that out much clearer, then we're happy to do that. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the reason I'm asking, is that it has become very complex. I'm also aware that the CPP hasn't met for a while. The LOIP was put through, but it doesn't seem to be meeting, and that's all part and parcel with this whole process. But if you like, I'm looking to make sure that we don't have any overlaps of service, that, you know, it's a clear path. So if people have got somebody they know needs something specific, they can direct them to the right place. But I think it's very confused at the moment. I wouldn't know where to go, because it might be CLD, it might be HSCP, it might be PCAS, but there's not a clarity to it. So I think I'd welcome some discussion about that.
Thank you, Councillor, and I'm sure we'll be able to get that organised. I have a question from Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, while I appreciate that this report would be massive if we went to all the details, but I was just wondering, when looking at the areas of improvement in Area 6 and 6.13, where we were informed about the participatory budget. And I was wondering that we're going to be using money in phase 2. I wonder if we could have a expanded explanation of what's going to be happening with the areas highlighted with the cost of living and the climate change.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Fiona Robertson to come in on that.
Actually, I think, apologies, I think if David could take that question, that would be great.
So the Green Living Fund, which was what the participatory budgeting project with the local action partnerships, that was badged for this year. That's the voting closed just over a week ago. We had 53 bids from groups, over 2,000 individual people voted, and the collective vote was just shy of 5,000 votes cast. And tomorrow, I think all elected members should be invited to the results, which will take place here. So we've invited local groups in, and we'll be going through each ward and giving them hopefully what they'll see as good news. So.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question is on page 30. It's point 7.2, priorities for phase 2 action plan. There's some great priorities within that. The ASN parent support network, the digital skills, community cook. But the one that stands out for me, mainly because I'm the older person's champion for Perth and Kinross, is the assessing and understanding the needs of older people in Perth and Kinross for actions in year 3 of the CLD action plan and implementing age-friendly communities. Is there anyone here that can give a little bit more insight into that, please?
Yeah, I can give a bit of that. Thanks for the question. Looking at the phase 1 report, it does very heavily focus on children and young people, and that's the reason for that being recovery from COVID. And quite rightly, there was a lot of attention on mental health of young people, but you're right, in terms of older people, there was perhaps less focus. So the phase 2 plan and the subsequent one will have a more focus on older people, and there's quite a lot of activity which does take place with older people. There are digital courses for older people, for silver surfers, I think is still the phrase. So there's a 5-week course that's run in the Learning Curve at Bells, or in Kinross, and also at Bedalbin, and possibly looking at expanding to Burnham. There's English speakers of other languages class for older people who are quite often socially isolated. One of the things we found from the Warm Welcome Fund and groups running activities in local halls and community centres was it surfaced a lot. There's quite a lot of older people who are isolated, particularly in some of our rural communities. There was activity for continuing for them. And then in terms of the age-friendly communities, Council agreed in October 2023 to join the World Health Organization's global network for age-friendly communities. That's a partnership in Perth and Kinross involving the NHS, ourselves, and third sector groups. Stirling University are also involved, and that at the moment that project is looking at mapping activity out in communities that would benefit older people, and to try and actually bundle that up so it's clearer what the offer is for people in their local areas.
I can do you two that are related to each other. Okay. Thank you. My questions are about reporting and the timing, really. The paper says that the CLD plan runs to September 2024, and then 4.7 refers to phase 2 priorities, which run to March 2024. That's now. I think Mr. Stokoe has just described what's going to happen in phase 2, but sounds as if we're nearly at the end of phase 2. And is that phase 3 starting from April 2024 to September 2024? So I'm just a bit confused about what this is covering and what happens next. And also, that's a related question is many of the dates in last year's report on this plan were 2022, and they've now jumped to say June 2024 as the deadline. How confident are we that we're going to meet those? Thank you, that's 2.
You come in on that.
So the phasing for the report and sequencing is as set out. So phase 1 is the 18 months. Phase 2 we are at the end of. We are currently now working on the next iteration of the action plan. So colleagues from the services around me are working on that. We expect that plan, or that we intend that action plan will cover the next 12 months. We are expected to have a new overarching document strategy in place September. That's the guidance from Education Scotland. But as people may be aware, there's currently an independent review of CLD taking place. So the advice we've had is that strategy will be fairly light touch, but it will not be a very detailed document. So the action plan, based on where we are and the levels of need, is not going to be significantly different. The action plan needs to be right for us and reflect the needs in our communities and the offer we can give. So we will see there will be a new action plan which will cover April 2024 to March 2025. So I don't know if that clarifies the timescales.
Thank you. Is that okay? Thank you. We have a question from.
Confidence about meeting all the deadlines that hit in June 2024?
Yeah, I mean, without going through each line, we would expect when we've got a deadline, that's what we will work towards. We'd expect to hit those deadlines.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question relates to page 27, specifically 5.4.4, the upskilling training. I just wondered what else is being done to utilise the many skills that these volunteers can provide. Thank you.
So at the moment, we've been working with PCAFs for the last few months to develop a new volunteer directory. So what is currently been launched is a new volunteer website, which is called Be the Change. And that will be a matching process where community groups can put their volunteer opportunities online. and prospective volunteers will essentially be able to go on and search for those opportunities, and then sign up for that. So in addition to that new offer, which I think will make a greater use of the great volunteer asset base that we have, various other services are very reliant on support volunteers. The Green Space, Bloom Groups, Duke of Edinburgh, very reliant again, use a lot of volunteers and training. So within each services, there's training and support for volunteering, but we want to use the website to kind of make the most of the volunteer base that we have.
Thank you. I don't think we can never underestimate the contribution that volunteers make to many areas, and supporting those volunteers and organisations, I think, is a very important thing for this council to do. We have a question from Councillor Duff.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Yeah, irrespective of the delay, I think this report documents some excellent work that's been going on in the fields of community learning and development and community engagement, and the infographic on page 37 is a great example of that. My question also relates to paragraph 5.4.4 to do with the volunteer upskilling fund, and it's obviously been a very useful fund for the training of communities, and there's a number of examples of things like food hygiene, first aid, Midas training listed there. Are we able to measure the outputs that have come from, this area of training, and are there still funds available in 24-25 for the continued upskilling of volunteers? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. It's a very good question. Would you like to come in on that? Thank you.
So for the thanks for the question. For the volunteer upskilling, we did produce a fairly light touch monitoring report, which just gave us the numbers and the metrics on what kind of training people were taking advantage of and where, so we can share that. In terms of ongoing support for volunteers, quite often when we get, and as members will know, community investment fund applications will often have training for volunteers. The Warm Welcome Fund again provides some of that. There's support and training for volunteers within services. So I think DV received quite a bit of training, for example, as do Green Space groups, and PCAV. We're constantly working with PCAVs to help them define their offer to support volunteering. And what we are looking at increasingly is how we can make use of some of the online resources and some of the national organisations as well that are around this, and so they can help groups.
A follow up, if I may, Vice Convener. I think there were monies put into the volunteer upskilling fund, but presumably these have now been depleted. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett, you have a further two questions. Are they related?
They're not related, but actually one of them's kind of been answered, so I've really only got one left. It's just that I tried to track the actions in Appendix 2, and we did get a late update to this, to the original plan that was issued, and I can't match them up, and some seem to be missing. So it was just if you could explain that, please, and just could we have a full report the next time so that we know where we are with all the actions on the plan? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. Yeah, so the action plan is a live document. It's something that we're constantly looking at, monitoring, changing. There were some actions in the first version which rather we've amalgamated, or in some cases we have removed, because actually they're a bit processy. And really the plan should be focusing on the impact and the work that we're doing in communities and with groups and with learners. So that hence why it doesn't read across from the original published version. We have just amended as we've gone.
Thank you. If I'm able to move on to a question from Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, my question relates to 7.1.2. It's basically about the locality working. The bit basically says this is what it's going to do, but it doesn't say how it's going to do it or how it's being trialled. I was wondering if we could have a very brief description of how it's working differently to other areas and you know, in Letham, Highland Perthshire and Cooper Angus, so what's actually being tried.
Thank you for the question. I can cover some of that as we're directly involved. So you've mentioned Cooper Angus there. So in terms of locality working in Cooper Angus, we have an action plan in place that we work with community planning partners and the local community. That has involved bringing a number of services together in the area to deliver on those actions. So in terms of what locality working looks like there, that is a very action plan led piece of work. Within Letham, again, that's quite different. So some of that work is around what we can do with the newly or soon to be opened hub, and reflecting the needs there. And I think Police Scotland were quite active in Letham as well. South Creef is another area that the Community Planning Partnership have identified, and again that will be different because there are different needs there. That's going to be around barriers to employment, childcare, making sure we're accessing local services. So each area has a different model. So there isn't necessarily at this moment in time a kind of strict defined model, and that has been done deliberately to see actually what works well and what works best for that local community.
Yep, come in.
Okay, thank you for that. But what you're describing to me sounds like what we do for the community. Does it involve the community doing things for themselves with our help, or is it us bringing services in to help the community?
I think the honest answer to that is it's a bit of a mix. In Cooper Angus, it's had to be very service led just because of the specific issues in that community. In Letham, it's much more community led because of the groups that are active there and the opportunities around the hub opening. Again, South Creef will be, or Creef as a whole will be slightly different because there's lots of different groups there, not necessarily focusing on the same issues. So, you know, there's a bit about working with them so that there's some common alignment.
Councillor Cuthbert, and apologies, Convener, Vice Convener, I'm not sure my Teams is working well. I had just stuck an A in the chat there. Councillor Cuthbert, the part of the answer to your question is really derived from what are the priorities in each of these communities, and in each of them, as David said, they are different. So in Cooper Angus, the issues were very much around employability opportunities on the back of various inequalities that we were aware of and have been aware of for some time, where we did a very concentrated piece of work to develop the action plan with a lot of engagement with communities over a period of months. And a number of community planning partners, including on the health side, are quite heavily involved. And as David says, it's public agencies which are leading a lot of the work there. In other localities, it is or will be different. So the dialogue is always around what is the priority, what needs to be done, and who is best placed to do it. And in some instances that will be the community, with potentially some support from us or other public agencies. In other situations, and Cooper Angus is a very good example of this, it will be for services to lead. But the starting point is, what are the priorities and needs in that locality? What data and evidence do we have of what those needs are? And as importantly, what are communities telling us are the priorities and needs, which, as you know well, Councillor Cuthbert, can change and shift over time. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Okay. If we move on, we have a question from Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It's just really a point of clarity. On page 26, regarding children's rights 5.2.4, it mentions young people's children's rights officer. I just wondered, is that singular, as in there is only one, or are there other children's rights officers? And just was interested to know what the process was for a young person to be referred in order to receive a service. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Would you like to come in?
Is it working? Yeah. So there's two bits of the answer to your question. Yes, there is only one children's rights officer for the council. Her role is really about trying to ensure that all council policies, procedures and the way in which we're delivering services are going to be compliant and in terms of UNCRC. So she is not going to get alongside individual children and young people in a way that perhaps you would think it would be. So certainly liaising with other services that are delivering for children and young people throughout the council. But alongside that, we have Independent Advocacy Perth and Kinross, which is an independent organisation which we are in partnership with to deliver individual advocacy for children and young people should they require it.
Thank you for that. We have a further question from Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question relates to page 49 of the pack, and it's in the section with the objective to better equipping our children and young people for the world of work. And I'm pleased to see there that the target was to establish 5 local job clubs across Perth and Kinross, but the progress update is that we've managed to establish 10 job clubs, which is an excellent result. I was wondering how effective these have been and whether we had any information around about how well they've done in terms of getting young people into work. Thank you.
Good, if you can take that.
Got it working this time. Thank you for your question. Yes, they have been extremely effective. Where I think the job clubs and where our services, in terms of services for young people, have been starting with is at a point that is with young people who are furthest away from the employment market. So we have been using ourselves and our partners through the Universal Youth Work provision to really target those young people who require the supports and skills in different ways. So services for young people are really focusing on building self-esteem, confidence, all those kinds of aspects to really begin to then look at how we can help young people even think about work, whereas our Universal Youth Work partners are looking at employment opportunities within their localities. So they have been successful. It requires, I don't have the actual facts about how many young people have secured employment. I could get that if that would be of interest to you. But I think what we have seen is growing confidence in our young people. We've seen them build the skills that will enable them to succeed if they get an opportunity for employment, and developing the partnerships which really allows for that kind of supported employment through our skills academies. So all of that is a good basis for the young people that are leaving where there is risk of a negative destination.
Thank you. I see no further questions to be asked, so I'll go to move this report. This report covers a number of key achievements delivered by community learning and development functions, working with some of our most vulnerable children, young people, adults, families, and as we've heard today, thanks to the question from Councillor Massey, our elderly communities as well. The CLD plan is a statutory document setting out the shared strategy for addressing inequalities, working alongside communities and third sector partners. The report covers the breadth of this activity and also sets out future priorities and the important role community learning and development can play in progressing locality working and our continued engagement with communities. You are asked to note the report and I'm happy to move that we do so.
Thank you, Vice Convener. And formally seconding the report, just very briefly, I'd like to thank David Stoke and his team for the work that they do. He has given me an excuse to speak about Letham, however, of course. And I do think, fingers crossed and touch wood when I say this, but the fact that we'll have community and learning development officers in the Letham hub, which although not quite open to the public yet, is nonetheless looking superb. But the fact that these officers will be working from the place where we hope that the community will come in large numbers, I think will be really important. But as Fiona alluded to, I think it's also important to recognise that every community is different, and therefore it's right that we take a bespoke approach to that. But happily to formally second. Thank you.
Are we agreed? Yeah, comments. So first comment from Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. I'd like to add my thanks to David Stocco and the team for the update report and to all those whose actions behind it have contributed to so many achievements supporting the most vulnerable and disadvantaged in our communities. We look forward to receiving the next report and plan, but we have to recognise that this area faces serious challenges following the SNP's budget cuts over the next 2 years, from community learning and development, adult literacy and community planning. Thank you again for your work on this.
Thank you. I have a comment from Councillor Duff.
Thanks, Vice Convener. This report highlights the excellent work ongoing across Perth and Kinross in relation to community learning and development and community engagement. The report provides brief details of a great many schemes that have been provided over the last few years to help individuals, families and groups become stronger, better citizens. And I'm sure there are a great many stories within these details. I think it might be good perhaps to see a few illustrative case studies in future reports of this kind. Can I finish by commending all of the officers involved for their hard work and dedication to these disadvantaged communities and community volunteers, and welcome the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener Carr. I will we'll move on now to the Raise and Attainment Strategy paper, and I think Mr. Sheena Devlin, sorry, is going to introduce this. Thanks, Sheena.
Thank you, Convener. The overall aim of the Perth and Kinross Raising Attainment Strategy is to set out our shared vision, priorities and expectations in relation to raising attainment and achievement for every child and young person. We were very grateful to be able to have the opportunity to have a session with elected members relating to this, the development of the strategy, and feel that we as officers have certainly benefited from that input. So thank you very much to all members who were able to join us for that and to participate. In Perth and Kinross, it would be fair to say that we try to take a holistic view of attainment and track that learning journey right from the early years as far on into sustained positive destinations for all children and young people as possible, and with a particular focus on those who face disadvantage and barriers to their learning. This strategy sets out the vision which will be enacted in the annual Education Improvement Plan, which of course will become before this committee in due course. And we then monitor that through the annual Raising Attainment report, which of course comes to this committee too. Most recently, I'm pleased to say that we have received our annual update for our 2023 school leavers, where in Perth and Kinross there is clear evidence that we have closed the poverty-related attainment gaps in all of our senior phase stretch aims, and have also increased to the highest level the proportion of young people who are now leaving school with a level 5 qualification. Of significant note too is the improved attainment of our care experienced school leavers. This strategy looks to build on the success of the previous strategy in helping to drive these positive outcomes for our children and young people, whilst also recognising, as ever, that there remains continued work to do in a number of areas as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheena. Just before we open up to questions, I think we actually probably need to formally approve the last report. I don't think we did that, so if we can agree the last report. Thank you very much. And Bailey Hearn has the first question, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. My questions are based on the indicators on page 68. And we're talking about a difficult period here because we had COVID and closures and opening and closures of schools. So it's good to see an increase in the levels of literacy and numeracy. But part of my question is the levels that we've seen increased from 2019 what we would have expected, or would you expect it slightly higher? And the other part of my question is my slightly autistic brain coming out here, that most of them are from 2019 to 2023. You've got one from 2020 to 23, and you've got 4 only ending in 2022. So why are they not all going to 2023? Thank you.
Sheena, please.
In terms of some of the dates linked to the data, Bailey Hearn, it will be to do when we actually receive that data. So I was able to reference in my introduction very briefly there that we just received the 2023 data linked to school leavers, for example. So it is about when we actually receive certain data that means we're able to provide that update. And in relation to our expectations around, were these levels where we expected them to see, I think what would be important is that we put those in the context of the national comparators. And so I'll ask David and Jill if they're able to come in relation to that aspect, because that would give you an indication, perhaps then, relative to performance across Scotland, where Perth and Kinross is sitting. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. Yeah, so in terms of where we are with our senior phase improvement journey, Bailey Hearn, I think that if we reference that in context with our comparator local authorities in the national picture, and indeed our own stretch aims that we set for ourselves for 2023, it's fair to say we're pleased with progress. So Sheena had referenced, for example, a number of young people who are leaving with 1 qualification at level 5. So here in Perth and Kinross, that's 2% higher than the national average and exceeds our comparator local authorities as well. I think the other thing that really pleases us in terms of senior phase attainment is that poverty-related attainment gap between quintile 1 and quintile 5, we've closed that for really all of our senior phase measures, whether it's 1 at 3, 1 at 4, 1 at 5, 1 at 6, or indeed tariff points as well. So in that sense, it has been a positive journey, but I think it's fair to say that you are always very aware of how you're generating your own improvement of what's happening in the rest of the country, because it's really important that we add value here. So we never take our eye off our virtual comparators or our national comparators or indeed comparator authorities in terms of that. And the final thing I would say is, I mean, that's part of the whole stretch aim process. It's intrinsic to this. We want to set stretch aims that are ambitious, achievable, but ambitious as well. And that is something that comes under quite regular scrutiny and review at Raise and Attainment Board as well, to ensure that we have them pitched at the right level. Particularly when, thankfully we see that many of these measures are actually increasing across Scotland.
Just to add to what David said in terms of our primary attainment, which is calculated here as a combined primary 1, 4 and 7 literacy and numeracy, it's a very pleasing and improving picture. Against our national comparators, we sit in line or above some of our national comparators within that group. We have a way to go in terms of the rate of improvement of some other local authorities, which means that we are just below the national average by around 1% combined what I would point out is that where we have made improvements, we've made some real significant leaps, particularly around primary 4 writing, moving from 67% to 61% in 1 year. So we have some stretch aims there that we are very ambitious with. However, we are working very hard on moving that attainment in the same rate as we have our primary 4 writing. We've got a good model for that there. So it's an improving picture across the board.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Gillian. Councillor Kigali, please.
Hi, I'm just wondering whether we can have some more information regarding secondary school exclusion. So I know in Wales there was a drop off immediately after the pandemic, and then that ticked up again. But I'm curious as to whether the reasons for exclusions have changed in the context of the pandemic, or whether they've remained fairly consistent since then.
Fiona, please.
Yeah. You're right that during the COVID recovery period, there were a lot less incidents initially, and that was in response to the restrictions that were placed on people in terms of close contact. But when we're looking at the data now and what was in existence prior to COVID, the reasons for exclusion are very similar. It tends to be isolated incidents that have come quite often from a child's additional support needs.
Thanks, Fiona. Sheena, would you like to add something to that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Kigali. You may recall that we had some discussion previously at this committee where we'd shared about the changes that we'd made around our guidance for schools in relation to exclusion to ensure that it was as robust as possible for them. And in fact, in one of the papers coming up after this paper, you'll see that one of the key features in relation to reduction in exclusions links to those care experienced young people, where for a considerable period of time we've been able to report that no young people who have been care experienced were excluded from school. But it's an area that we keep under review and monitor very closely, not just across the Education Services team, but also through other groups within the council as well. And it's really helpful that what we have is a short life working group, that we have a representation from all sectors. So we have school-based staff represented on that who work with us together on that, because one of the things that we know is that exclusion from school can be a very early indicator of poorer life outcomes for children and young people. And therefore, whilst we absolutely do use it when it's appropriate, we recognise that it is a final sanction. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Leishman, please.
Thanks very much, convener. I appreciate that the data may not be available to hand, but I'm curious as to how enrolment and uptake in non-compulsory subjects are performing. Are there any trends that are developing across our secondary schools?
David, please.
In short, yes, I think there are trends that develop sometimes quite slowly over time, and they're reflected nationally. So, for example, one of the top 9 presentation subjects here in Perth and Kinross is National 5 Practical Cookery. Now, that's something that we wouldn't have seen 4 or 5 years ago, and it probably reflects in small part at least the broadening of the curriculum that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years. There's been other developments as well, as a new qualification called Application of Maths, and that's to allow more young people the opportunity to display their numeracy skills at level 5 and level 6, but in a more practically assessed and based way. So things like that have been changes, if you like, subtle changes to the senior phase course offer and the curriculum that sits behind that, and are reflected here locally with us and nationally. And it is something that we keep under kind of close review year on year.
Sheila, please.
I think in addition to sharing areas where we're seeing an upward trend, Councillor Leishman, it's probably important that we also acknowledge that we do see the reverse in some subject areas. And I think it would be fair to say that modern languages would be one where, not in all schools, but in some schools, we have seen over a period of time uptake decline.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. I'm aware that one particular S6 St John's pupil, his non-compulsory take-up of practical cookery has meant I've got to worry about my tea a couple of times a week less often. But thank you for the question. Councillor Duff, please.
Thanks, Convener. My question is in relation to the infographic on page 68 and the couple of boxes there to do with school attendance. And as you can see from the infographic, there's a worrying drop there in both the primary school and secondary school attendances, although it is over the period 2019 to 23, which obviously covers the COVID period. Is it the case that this, has dipped down and is coming back up during the period, or is it still a downward trend? And how does that compare Perth and Kinross against the kind of national attendance trend? Thank you.
I think the drop in attendance is national. I know that we have concerns about this. I'll come to Mr McCluskey in a minute, but I know that we've already started work on it, and there's been a couple of workshops indeed that Councillor Carr and myself have attended, but we'll get more detail from the expert rather than me continue to chat about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a national concern, and it's something in which there's a lot of ongoing research happening nationally. We're engaging with our partners and across Tayside as well to see if it's something that we can address together, and actually to get to the root of what's changed in terms of the attendance picture as part of the COVID landscape. As part of our own response this year here in Perth and Kinross, we've created this attendance forum, which rather than a one-off event, it's 3 events. We've just had a second event, which was an online event and a catch-up. And as part of that attendance forum, we've asked every school in Perth and Kinross to make a public promise this year to take an action, if you like, that's going to actually improve attendance within their own context. As part of that, we've also had a real deep dive into our attendance data to really find out where our gaps are, where those gaps have stayed the same pre-COVID and where they've grown in the post-COVID landscape as well, to really try and get under the bonnet of where change has actually happened. And early indications are that it is improvement, that some of the kind of metrics round about it are improving. For example, there's always been a poverty-related aspect to school attendance, and that's pre-COVID, that's been long-standing. But as at the end of term 2 in Perth and Kinross, that had decreased significantly as a result of the actions that schools had actually been undertaking. And a lot of it is just that kind of relentless focus that needs to happen, but there's a lot of learning around about this as well. We have a final event on the 30th of May, and we're really looking forward to that, to celebrate some of the success we've had, but also to see what we can really crystallise into improvement planning for the years to come.
Thanks, David. Sheila?
I think one of the interesting things that we have noticed, Councillor Duff, is that the reasons for where there's been poorer attainment is not necessarily uniform across all schools. So the response that David and the rest of the team have been taking is very much about one which, yes, there's a universality in terms of approach to improving attendance, but there's also the requirement for some slightly different targeted approaches in different areas and for different schools, which of course then makes that even more complicated. So it's never just one thing. There's a range of different contributing factors to that, but through the work that's been undertaken, we are beginning to see some improvements, and we would hope that with continued support from parents and carers, that we would see more young people being in school more regularly, more often. Thank you.
Thank you, that's reassuring.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. I've got a question from Councillor Cuthbert and then a last question from Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener. My question's a bit tongue-in-cheek, and perhaps a wee bit cheeky as well. I'm taking the numbers that are on these the charts of as being 2019, for example, being June of 2019, so the kids leaving at that time. It strikes me that the kids that left in 2019, or the statistics relate to that, was when we had all the schools up and running, it was all operating normally. And the ones for 2022 obviously had 18 months or 2 years of disruption and kids working from home. Would I be wrong to say that it would part of this be because kids actually like working from home and that remote working works better and that maybe schools aren't the right solution? As I said, it's a cheeky question.
I'm reasonably sure that there'll be strong opinions in the room as to that. I don't know if anybody wants to. Sheena, please.
I think we're all entitled to our own opinion, and then what we do is use the data that we have and any evidence that we have, and I mean that sincerely, both quantitative and qualitative data. And one of the key bits of data certainly that has informed the wider education system is a report from December 2019, December 2020, which was written by the International Council of Education Advisors. And these are a group of renowned educational specialists from across different parts of America, of the UK, all 4 nations, and indeed across Europe. And one of the key findings in there was that they were unequivocal in their statement around the primacy of physical education being important, not just from a learning perspective, but also because of the view that education is more than just about learning, but it's a social construct, and that the coming together in the way that young people do, the learning is not just that which might be linked to academia or a particular subject, but it's about learning how to be and learning how to be in amongst other people. So I've not seen anything that's would suggest that actually individualized remote learning for young people, all doing all of their learning from a place that is devoid of other young people or other adults, is in any way beneficial for them and in terms of their development. What we do know is that for some people who have perhaps high levels of anxiety around being in busy and noisy establishments, periods of time learning in a quieter area, and that might be, you know, in a place in a school or out with a school, is beneficial. But the primacy of education as a social construct and as a place for learning is something that there's a lot of evidence to support is essential for the development of young people in the context of their citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. I do think whilst there was an element of tongue-in-cheek nature of your question, it's also important to learn lessons from what happened during COVID, not least in my opinion with regards to assessment, for example. And just to add to what Sheena's saying there about quiet places, we did accept that members to my left here had a good point about investing some money into quiet places during the budget process, and they were right to do so, and we were glad we accepted that. So I think that you do make a serious point as well, or you allow us to make some serious points with the question. Of course, Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, I mean, there was an element of tongue-in-cheek. There's an element of seriousness. I think there's a number of ASN, in particular, pupils who really struggle in the large secondary school environment that we seem to be putting them into, and in some cases they might benefit from actually working from home with some sort of AI or other interactive training system or lesson system, rather than having to come into a school environment where they're really uncomfortable. I mean, I turn the lights down before this meeting because I get affected by the bright lights. So I think there is something we need to look at and discuss further later on.
Yeah, no, absolutely accepting that point. I know Councillor Frampton likes the lights turned down as well. I would point to Connections and Navigate as a vehicle for that kind of quieter place to learn sometimes. But you know, absolutely accepting the point that you make, Councillor Cuthbert. Absolutely. Sheena.
Thank you, and you're absolutely right, Councillor Cuthbert. And through the extension of what we call our intensive support provision across our secondary school estate, exactly that kind of environment, which is much smaller, much calmer, much quieter, and does help with those children and young people who do find, as I said, that busier, noisier environment difficult to work in. And what we also know is, of course, that we're not just preparing young people for their time at school, but we're also trying to prepare them for life beyond school. And so that integration into different environments as best as they can manage and be supported in is something else that we're also keen on, so that they're not just managing their learning in the here and now, but they're also developing to be able to, at the point of them leaving school, undertake, whether that's further study or work. And our work that we do with Perth Autism Support has been really quite important in that regard, because it absolutely is about supporting young people with additional support needs whilst they're at school, but also importantly supporting them in that transition beyond school as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. I'm sure we'll have conversations in a similar vein over the next wee while. Councillor Leishman.
Thanks, Convener. With your permission, I know you said this was the last question. Can I have 2 last questions, please?
Certainly can.
Thanks very much. It was the first one is following on from something that Mr. McCluskey said in answer to my original question. If you could clear it up, that would be great. Has the curriculum broadened in Perth and Kinross, or has it narrowed? Because one of the criticisms I hear fairly regularly from teachers regarding curriculum for excellence is that the subject choice has actually narrowed.
David?
I think when we talk curriculum, it's really important that we recognise the totality of learning experience in a school. And I think sometimes it's easy to kind of conflate that with the subjects that are studied as being it. And of course, it's not. It's all about the life and ethos of the school. It's all about those opportunities to take your learning and apply them in different places within school as well. It's obviously about those kind of more specific subject knowledge, skills-based approaches that we use. It's all about employability in a senior context, in the secondary, in fact, all the way through education, building those skills into young people as they move through. So no, I don't think that the curriculum has narrowed. And I think that even when we look at our senior course choice, if you were to look at that as a narrow definition through what it's called Insight, it's our Scottish Government-based tool where we can look at the course catalogue now compared to what we offered 10 years ago. It's far, far larger than it was. The growth of National Progression Awards here in Perth and Kinross has been immense. And we now offer, it might be close on double the number of courses that we do in our senior phase to compare to, say 10 years ago when National Progression Awards weren't part of our landscape. So there are far more opportunities now for young people to demonstrate their learning across the piece. So no, I wouldn't say the curriculum's narrowed. I would say it's in fact broadened and become more appropriate for everyone that's out there in the school landscape.
Thanks very much. I'm now going to go for 3 last questions because you've just given me another one there. Is that typical to Perth and Kinross only, or is that a nationwide one?
So that's nationwide. In terms of our level 6 NPAs, we've probably got the Insight Advisor. We have them in every year, and we've got a bit of a kind of health check of our system, if you like. And our level 6 NPAs are a wee bit above where he's seeing elsewhere nationally. But we're certainly at least in line with the national picture in terms of that growth.
That's great. Thanks very much for clearing that up. My last question, it isn't a general raising attainment question. It's more specifically concerning the many issues that there are at Perth Academy. And I know that PKC will support the leadership team in their plan to rectify the issues at the school. Of the list of things that need to improve, what in the inspection report came as a surprise to the QIOs, or if the findings weren't a surprise, for how long had QIOs have concerns of what was going on at the Academy?
Sheila, please.
Thank you. I think I would want to broaden out your question in terms of what was known to the Education Services team. There are more people than QIOs who work across Education Services. And in terms of the overall evaluations that the school received, they were broadly in line with the view that the Education Services had of the school. Councillor Leishman, thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm now going to move the report, if that's okay. This is a positive report, and it's important that we recognise the efforts of our officers, many of whom are here today, but also our whole school staff across the school estate and indeed in our early learning establishments. We do recognise there's a lot of work to do, and has been alluded to last week's Academy Inspection report is evidence of that. And indeed, there are concerns, continuing concerns over attendance figures, although we've already recognised that, and there's work already underway to try and make that better. So we absolutely accept that not everything is rosy in the garden, as it were, but it is a positive report, and there's some really positive work going on in our schools and our early learning estate to raise attainment, and the report evidences that. There's good progress being made in development milestones in our P1 starters. Literacy and numeracy levels have grown across primary and secondary. Positive destinations for our school leavers has become the norm, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest that pupils are leaving school as numerate, literate, well-rounded, intelligent young adults ready to face the world. Care experienced primary pupils are achieving far higher levels of numeracy and literacy in the primary schools than they did previously, but the attainment gap for care experienced pupils is still too high, and so that's why we were delighted to make provision in our budget to support our Promise Improvement Lead, and I know Councillor Frampton's likely to speak about that again later on. So we recognise that there's still work to do, but we also recognise that this is a really positive report, and I commend it to the committee. Are there any comments? I think we do from Councillor Barrett first, please.
Thank you, Convener.
Sorry, Councillor Barrett. As always, I forget that I need to ask Councillor Frampton to formally second. Sorry.
Happy to second.
Sorry, Councillor Barrett. Go for it now.
Thank you, Convener. And thank you to Sheena Devlin, David McCluskey for this report, and to all the teams for the work behind it. I found the link in the last line of page 72 to the performance against the core stretch aims was very useful as a reminder that we need to keep our focus and resources on tackling the continuing impacts of the COVID lockdowns, including on early development milestones, health and well-being, additional support needs, attendance and attainment, as well as key areas of education and destinations. I welcome our general good position in relation to some comparative local authorities, but I'm confident there is no danger of our dedicated staff in schools and across education and children's services lapsing into complacency about this. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett, and just to be reassured, there's no danger of the administration lapsing into any kind of complacency as well, but thank you for the comments. Councillor Duff.
Thanks, Convener. It's great to see the advances made in many of the targets between 2019 and 2023, despite the impact of COVID. More of our young people achieving expected levels for their ages in literacy and numeracy, more school leavers achieving qualifications, more school leavers going to positive destinations. The attendance appears to be the one significant area where there is a worrying downward trend, but I'm reassured by the comments made by officers today on how this is being tackled. As the convener stated, this is a very positive report, and thanks must go to the officers and the teachers involved in raising attainment across Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
Well said, Councillor Duff, if you don't mind me saying. Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener Rebick, and thank you to Sheena Devlin and everyone involved that contributed to the report. In previous comments on raising attainment, I've paid tribute to our teaching staff, and once again, I will do so. We're incredibly fortunate we have the skilled and dedicated teaching workforce that we do have in Perth and Kinross, because teachers are under enormous pressure to raise attainment. They're working under this considerable strain, plus having to contend with violence and aggression issues in schools. Then it's no wonder that teacher morale, from what I hear from teachers, is incredibly low. Previously in committee, I've also been critical of Curriculum for Excellence, and I believe that the grades achieved are largely in spite of many aspects of it, and certainly not because of it. And the positive destination of further education is suffering from reduced course offerings after secondary school. In my ward, UHI Perth is a victim of underfunding and somewhat chaotic senior management. staff and students are the ones suffering from the cuts because of this. And not to mention the disgraceful manner that this time last year, around about this time last year, the senior management team handled the potential closure of the nursery last year. That would have seen 14 nursery staff lose their jobs and families left scrambling about to organise alternative childcare arrangements after zero consultation. Convener, I appreciate that this is a somewhat downbeat comment after the positivity of the report, but I think it needs said, and I think that my last comment is emphatic, really, in that the bottom line is that we won't reduce the educational attainment gap, not to the extent that we need. Only when we have a fundamental shift in addressing the societal inequality and the resulting fall in living standards that inequality produces will we be able to close the educational attainment gap properly, and the many other gaps that are making social mobility only go one way, tragically downwards.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. I'm inclined to agree to some degree with your last comment. I would disagree that being in schools on a regular basis, and of course we recognise that violence and aggression's unacceptably high, absolutely recognise that, but low morale is not generally something I recognise when I go in about schools. It certainly doesn't feel like that to me, but comments appreciated nonetheless. Can we agree with the report? Thank you. I'm now going to pass on to Councillor Frampton, and in doing so, I want to, and I've said this before, I'll continue to do this. Just before we move on, we do have one paper, another one. Do we need a comfort break at this point, or are we content to carry on? Yeah, we'll carry on. Yeah, I just want to thank Councillor Frampton for continued work in the next paper. It is really invaluable to me, so thank you, Councillor Frampton, and if you'd like to take the next paper, I'd very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and I'm just going to hand over to Aaron to do the update on corporate parenting.
Thank you, Councillor Frampton. So the report before committee today provides progress against the current Corporate Parenting Action Plan 2021-2024. The report outlines the legislative basis for the compilation of the report, which focuses on evidencing the Council's contribution to meeting the needs of care-experienced young people. The current plan focuses on 5 key areas, from providing the best start in life, good quality learning experiences, opportunities for good physical and mental health, providing improved life chances for those experiencing inequalities and disadvantage, and safeguarding children from harm. The update to the current action plan is noted in Appendix 2, and Section 4.8 of the report highlights some of our key achievements over the past year. Of particular note is our progress in ensuring that care-experienced children and young people are not excluded from school, and at the end of November 2023, there were none. The development of our Connections tool, which allows children and young people to identify those relationships most important to them to ensure that they are not lost, has been an invaluable piece of work that has been undertaken. And for our workforce, we are in the progress of rolling out our trauma-informed training. As the current corporate parenting plan comes to an end this year, we will ensure that the next one dovetails in with the Promise Plan 2024-2030, which has currently been developed and due to be published later on this year. In addition, we will ensure that our local priorities in our plan are influenced by young people. We have Linda Richards here today, who is our corporate parenting lead, who will be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Open the floor to questions. Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. My question, and it's a difficult one to ask, is about the percentage of brothers and sisters who are accommodated, those that are accommodated by themselves and those that are accommodated with their siblings. And it's very hard because each child is an individual, so there are various reasons why somebody may not be accommodated with their sibling. But I was taken by the sentence about the National Working Report. These indicators will give an indication on our performance nationally. And I just wonder how you can measure that as a performance. These children are individuals, and we shouldn't be measuring them against anybody else. They've got difficulties with their families, difficulties amongst themselves, which is why they're in care themselves. And to put an indicator and a performance on that's really difficult. We need to be thinking about these individuals, and I've been struggling to how to ask the question about those that weren't accommodated with their brothers and sisters. As I said before, they're all individuals, and it's concerning. And what sort of work is done to try and help those individuals who are probably losing out a lot in not being with the parents and not being with their siblings, but you know, each person's individual, and there might be safety reasons around that, but it's really concerning numbers. And the bit about a performance nationally is a bit worrying, because we shouldn't be measuring that performance.
Okay, so you're absolutely right. I think it's the first year we've been asked to report on how many siblings are living together, and I think you're absolutely right. There are going to be individual circumstances in terms of some of the trauma that they've experienced being at home together, and also some kind of resource issues as well. So, you know, availability of foster carers, for example, what their registration is like, how many bedrooms they have. We are always trying as far as possible to accommodate children together, but there may be some extenuating circumstances that don't allow us to do that, and I think you're absolutely right around that. Linda, is there anything you want to add?
So I can just add a wee bit to that. So as part of the work of the Independent Care Review, there is a piece of legislation which is called the Brothers and Sisters legislation. And that really challenges local authorities to ensure that brothers and sisters who are accommodated at the same point remain together unless it is unsafe to do so. And really what this indicator is all about is in looking at our performance in terms of that piece of legislation, and that is what the national view will be, is the performance across Scotland. Some of the challenge the local authorities have been given by the Promise Scotland and by the young people who have influenced the Promise Scotland is exactly the question that you have asked. So if they cannot be in placement together, either because of, as Aaron has indicated, we don't have sufficiency of foster care placements or large enough houses, etc., then, and indeed, you know, our kinship carers also require sometimes bigger houses and extensions and what have you, then it is how we then ensure that the contact between those brothers and sisters who can't remain together is continued. And part of the connections tool that I've alluded to in the report is to do exactly that. So it's about helping the young person, the child or young person, when they're accommodated, to really think about who is significant to them. And that might be their brother, and it might be their sister, but it also might be their auntie or a neighbour or a school friend. And it's then developing a connections plan round about that that ensures that those contacts are remaining. We are really striving hard, along with our kinship carers and our foster carers, to ensure that brothers and sisters are in the same placement together. Our housing colleagues have really supported our work in this area and developed, you know, different pots of money that has allowed for, you know, extensions, room alterations, all those kinds of things on council property. We've used business cases to gain some funding to allow for the same thing to be happening within foster care households or where they're owner occupied. We've also looked at, you know, strategic need points given to our kinship carers. So there's lots of things that we are trying to do. What I will say is that this is a national priority, and there is also a recognition that the Brothers and Sisters legislation is a national challenge for all local authorities, and it's for that reason that the performance is going to be reported within the Children Looked After statistics, which happens every July and reported back to the Scottish Government.
Thank you, Linda. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you, Linda, and to the teams for the report. It would be helpful going forward, perhaps, if on page 89, the summary, we've got who we were supporting back in the summer of 2021, but in future, if we could have an update showing the current position, that would be really helpful. My question is about, it's again, probably it's a bit of a timing thing as well. In 4.8 on page 80, we talk about the new process for putting a coordinated support plan in place for each care experienced child and young person. But then in the actions on page 93, it's not clear when this is actually going to be achieved for all care experienced young people. Could you let us know, please?
I can start, and I think Fiona, if there is anything that Fiona would want to add to that. So the Legislation and Digital Support Needs Act, in terms of coordinated support plans, and Fiona will keep me right actually, is that for care experienced, most children need to meet the criteria in order to be assessed for a coordinated support plan. For care experienced, it's the other way around. So we should assume that they have needs which would sufficiently agree a coordinated support plan, and then decide if they don't. So I think what Fiona and I have been working quite hard is about actually ensuring how that happens. So the new process is in place now, and we are looking at the LAC review is the Looked After Children's Review, which is a statutory review and happens on a regular basis, is the key kicking off point where the question is asked of education staff, have you considered a coordinated support plan? And we are looking at trying to record, so it's the recording of that question being asked and whether that is being considered, which then meets the legislation, the question in the legislation that has started. So we're able to report from that. Fiona, is there anything else you would want to add?
Just to say that, again, every situation is very individual, and not all young people who are looked after will require significant additional support, because they may be in a very settled placement, despite having not been with their families. There is though quite a bit of bigger piece of work that we're doing around the decision making around CSPs and what's required and the coordination of working together. So there's an audit that we're currently undertaking, looking at what the learning is from our existing young children and young people that are in the system, and the support that they're being provided with. So that's why, although we've got the process in place, as Linda's outlined, we know that there's probably a bit more work that needs to be done to make sure that that's as effective as possible. So in terms of ensuring that we have as many young people as require it to have a CSP, it's quite difficult to put an actual time on that because we have a natural turnover. But by the end of this year, we would expect to have all of our current looked after children and young people who require a CSP to have that in place.
Thank you, Linda and Fiona. Councillor Leishman.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener. The Promise Oversight Board have said that due to worsening circumstances for so many, that the delivery of the original aims of the Promise at the initial timescales look unrealistic. Are we in Perth and Kinross on pace to achieve what we need to by the end of firstly 2024 and then ultimately 2030?
Thanks, Councillor Leishman. I think we do exceptionally well in Perth and Kinross for our care experienced children and young people. And I think when you meet them and talk to, as many of you do, talk to them on a regular basis, they are well able to identify what it is that they require support with, and what indeed all of us as services working for the council can do to improve their lives. They tell us that on a frequent basis. What I would say is that at the start of this process, and I've spoken for a number of different occasions now about actually what does meeting the promise look like. And I don't know that there is a clear answer to that nationally. I think locally, what we have done in our update is how we are meeting what we think is relevant to Perth and Kinross within the promise. At the start of the process, before creating this action plan, we did a self-evaluation with our young people who told us what we needed to do, what we needed to change. Since then, there's obviously been different pieces of legislation. We've had a pandemic and there's been lots of different demands that have come through the door. But what we're hoping to do is do the same process for the next plan, and that is really self-evaluate across the council and look at what is the promise challenging us to do, what does our young people, children and young people experience from our services, what is it that we need to do better on, and thinking about then what the actions collectively that we need to take. So I'm confident that we are meeting the promise as far as we have evaluated ourselves in terms of what we need to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
Thank you. I'm on page 89. It's a length of time cared for graph. Excuse my ignorance, but I'm not understanding the graph. Does it mean that there's 60 children, like there's 60 children a year that are looked after for a year, or is it a child that's a year old being looked after for? I don't understand the graph. It's not telling me what I need to know.
Okay, well, I can explain that so this is a graph that is at a particular point in time, and as of the 31st of July 2021, when the report was first came to council. Each of these are, so it's at that particular time of our looked after population, how long had each individual child been looked after for?
So the 60 children have been looked after for a year in the blue one, the second blue one.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions in the box, so I'm just going to move this report. And moving the report, I want to say one of the most important things we can do is listen to the children and young people in our care, and as far as possible, involve them in the decisions that affect their lives. The corporate parenting plan allows us to work with them and give them a sense of control over their lives and their future. Later this year, the next iteration of the Promise Plan will be published, and our current corporate parenting plan will be reviewed and updated in accordance with the new priorities. We continue to give the commitment that our next plan will be fully informed by the experiences of the young people who have previously been and currently are being cared for. We were also pleased that as a result of the budget process, we were absolutely clear of our support for the role of Promise Improvement Lead, as this will be a crucial role in that care experienced learners will have someone to advocate on their behalf. I believe all corporate parenting partners in PKC are to be commended for the work and commitment shown to all our care experienced children and young people across Perth and Kinross. And I'll ask Councillor Rebick to second.
Thanks very much, Councillor Frampton. And formally second that, I just want to thank Linda and her team for the work, as always. And I do think it's important that we follow through on the promise. Councillor Shires was a great advocate in the last administration and asked Councillor Barrett, I think, and I to physically sign the promise. And I think it's important that we don't just sign it and think that's great, we congratulate ourselves. We actually do need to continue working to deliver in whatever shape or form that promise is, we do need to deliver it. So I'm happy to firm the second. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we agree with the report? I'll open the floor to any comments. Councillor Leishman.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener Frampton, and thank you to Aaron Singh for the report, and also to Linda for the information and for highlighting the invaluable work that is being done. And it is genuinely invaluable work. Your team do a terrific job. The action plan lays out areas that are needing addressed, including further staff training and additional support needs. And I'm relieved to hear that we think that we are on pace to achieve what we need to within the promise's original timescales. Sadly, I think there will be many local authorities that won't be in that position. But I do think that the promise does have some clear objectives, and I think it's fair to say that sadly the Scottish Government have fallen behind in the 3 key priority areas of 1, care experienced children and young people receiving everything they need to thrive at school, 2, having brothers and sisters live together, and 3, eradicating homelessness for care leavers. 2030 is only 6 years away, and with public finances stretched to the absolute limit, delivering on the aims of the promise will be a tall order, but something that absolutely must be met.
Thank you. I see no more comments. I'll hand back to the convener.
Thank you very much again, Councillor Frampton. Just to be clear, we're formally happy to read the report. Thank you. We move on to our last paper of the day, which is reserved places in schools and maximising capacities update, which Sheena will introduce. Just before she does, I just want to thank Karen Robertson at this point for the really good work she does on this. I know, I can't remember which member it was, but I'm fairly sure somebody last year asked if we could have the capacities and the roles included in the table. And although not directly linked to reserved places, it is helpful, it is useful. So thanks, Karen, for including that in. And I'll ask Sheena now to introduce the report.
I'm pleased to bring this report before committee today. Excuse me. Whilst it's a routine report, we often describe this as routine. It's a very important report that is presented annually to committee to seek approval to reserve a number of places within our schools, which have classes with a limited number of spaces. Reserved places is something that's been in operation in Perth and Kinross since 1997. Taking this approach allows the council to take positive action to try to ensure that pupils moving during the school year can, where possible, still be accommodated in their catchment school by protecting spaces for local children. The proposed reserved places arrangements for 24-25 is a positive and therefore proactive measure based on the planned arrangements for class structures which will be in place from August 2024. The reserved places will continue to be closely monitored and reviewed where necessary. The changes which have been proposed for session 24-25 have taken account of head teachers' views, of historical and anticipated patterns of migration, and knowledge of planned residential developments. This report also informs committee where primary class capacities have been temporarily maximised during the school session 23-24 to allow catchment pupils to be admitted. We're happy to take any questions, although that's the royal we, I think, convener, because I think it will be Karen Robertson that will probably answer most. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. First questions from Councillor Freshwater, please.
Many thanks, Sheena, for the report. Obviously, it's a really useful report to have on an annual basis. It was just to pick up on the point you made about the reference to obviously to housing development, which is obviously a key for a number of wards, including my own of Kinross, where there is expansion. In terms of the school estate, how is that sort of faring up against the projections? You know, I know we've got, for example, again speaking of Kinross, we've got a little bit of capacity there. How is it looking? How is that looking over the next couple of years in terms of our school estate capacity to meet the demand? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I know that this has been an ongoing question in Kinrossshire, and it's with something that I've attended meetings at. It is important that we consider all these things. It feels like we're in a good place, but I'll ask Karen to expand on that, please.
Thank you for your question. There are no current issues within our school estate. We work
very closely year on year in terms of monitoring our projected roles. These are updated every year at the point of census. Our asset management colleagues work very closely with us in terms of planning applications that have been made, monitoring the agreed build out rates and also the numbers of pupils that are coming forward. So we are doing that on an ongoing basis against any changes that are happening as pupils move through the school. So we had a kind of high level of primary school pupils that's tailored off now as those pupils are now coming through the secondary school estate, and those pupils will go through and move on. So at the moment there are no issues in terms of being able to accommodate children from the house building that's coming through at the moment, but we are continuing to review that on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Councillor Freshwater. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks to Sheena and Karen for the report and the work behind it to identify where we've got the most likely need for places and the contingency we need to minimise the disruption for families moving into an area. I see at paragraph 5.1 that there have already been 3 primary pupils unable to attend their non-denominational catchment school. At this stage last year, that number was just 1 pupil. I just wondered, is this one school or several schools involved in that, Karen?
It's one school, Councillor Barrett. Thank you.
That, oops, sorry, just supplementary. So that been picked up in the plan for next year? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Duff.
Thanks, Convener. My question is in relation to paragraph 7.1, where it talks about the additional flexibility, if you like, of using a space capacity metric of 1.7 metres squared per pupil for primary schools if required. I wonder if we're able to find out, are we using that generally in every primary school or only in certain, and if so, how many schools are using that metric at the moment?
It's only when it's required, but I will ask Karen how many are currently being used.
Thank you. It is only as and when required, as you said, Convener. Currently, it's only being used in 2 primary schools, which are identified in section 7.4. But just for clarity, that's not all classrooms in both of those schools. It is 1 classroom in Dumbarnie to allow 1 catchment pupil in above the metric, and at RDM primary school, it's 2 classrooms to allow 1 child into each of those 2 classrooms.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Cuthbert, please.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, my question relates to Bertha Park High School. I sat on a couple of placing appeals, both related to ASN pupils, I think, and both wanted to go to Bertha Park but had been refused. It does strike me that we've got a situation where currently Bertha Park's quite empty. It's only got 645 pupils and schools designed for 1,100. And there seems to be an ISP there and kids want to go there who are ASN. And I'm just wondering that I see we've got 26 reserved places there. But what I'm wondering is, do we have any places reserved for ASM pupils that wish to be placed at the school? Because at the moment, there's a number of parents who seem to want to go there rather than other schools because of the way it's designed, the layout, all the ISP and all the rest of it. So I'm just wondering, is there anything built into these reserved places for ASM pupils?
Thanks, Councillor Cuthbert. I do know from personal experience that these placement requests or appeals can be quite heartbreaking at times. So, Karen.
Thank you. The reserved places contained within the report are for the mainstream classes, Councillor Cuthbert. There are not reserved places within the ISP at Bertha Park or at any of our schools that have an ISP, as parents do not make placement requests directly to that ISP. The consideration of the allocation of children to attend is a decision that's taken through the ASN transition panel. Thank you.
Yep.
I guess this is more of a comment, but I think we need to look at this quite carefully. I've mentioned before that we've got ASM pupils who would like a smaller school, an atmosphere that's more congenital to their own condition, if you like. They can't tolerate loud noises, big places. And I was thinking maybe Bertha Park should be looked at for this, but what we're saying is that these are just the kids that come into the area. I do think we need to look at this question of ASM provision, where we're going to put them, and perhaps even add them into the Bertha Park numbers and come back to committee with something on that.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. I think you raise a valid point, and yeah, let's see what we can do. Provost.
Yes, thanks, convener. A couple of questions. I wanted to just pick up on Councillor Duff's earlier point around the space capacity metric that we use, and I remember a paper coming in the last term around space capacity, but I'm afraid my memory has failed me on what was agreed in that. But in the recent discussions around the Pitlochry Community Campus proposal, I was told that the national figure that's used for secondary school pupils is, I think, 1.5 metres squared. Now, I understand there is a difference between secondary and primary. Obviously, primary are based out of one classroom consistently. I just wanted to understand what number we use for secondary in our schools, in terms of are we using the 1.5 or are we using a different number?
Thanks, Provost. David. Karen, sorry.
Thank you, Provost. I would need to check that specifically with our property colleagues. The maximising capacities within this report refers only to primary schools, so we don't maximise capacity in the way that we're talking in this report in any of our secondary schools. But the metric that you have mentioned there in terms of 1.5 for secondary schools, for our primary schools within Perth and Kinross, our policy is 2 metres square per pupil. For our maximising capacities in any schools that we would require to do that, we have agreed a metric of 1.7 metres square. However, the Scottish Government indicates that we could operate at 1.5 metres square in primary schools as well, but I would need to check the specifics of the secondary school calculation, as the capacities of secondary schools are calculated differently to those of primary schools, and I don't have that detail just now. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Did you have a second question, Provost?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in after Bailey Ahern if you like.
Just go for it, Provost.
Thanks, then. Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up in terms of we've, you know, as you'll appreciate, from time to time we are contacted by constituents around desire to obviously send their children to a different school from their catchment school, and you know, many of us have sat in the policing request committee. I think it'd just be helpful to have a bit of an understanding around has there been any shift in the because obviously we have taken reductions in the DSM budget over time, although teacher numbers are fixed across Perth and Kinross at the moment. Could we get a bit of an explanation about how the teacher numbers within schools factor into some of this decision around how many places we need to hold back given that changing staffing position?
Karen, please.
Thank you. Before coming on to the part about the staffing, you're correct, Provost, in that parents have a legal right to make a request that their children attend a school other than their designated catchment school. There isn't a legal entitlement for pupils to attend alternative schools, but the local authority is required by law to grant placing requests wherever possible, unless one of the legal grounds set out in the Act actually applies. And one of those legal grounds does relate to the staffing of a school. but reserved places don't sit in isolation in terms of the number of spaces that are allocated and then how many children can get in or can't get in. Across all of our schools, this features as part of the framework that we use in each year, looking at our staffing standards across all of our schools. So as you talked about with teacher numbers, the staffing budget is there to meet the total number of pupils across all schools in Perth and Kinross, and we are then required to allocate that school appropriately, allocate the staffing appropriately across all of our schools to make sure that we can ensure that children can attend their catchment school. So the starting point across all of our schools is looking at the known number of children who are in a particular school, those children moving up a year, the numbers leaving, and the number of children who are coming in as catchment pupils. And that is the determining factor in relation to the staffing standard, which will determine how many teachers will be allocated to a school, which then allows us to look at how classes will be configured, or in some cases for secondary school in terms of their timetabling, and that then allows us to see how many spaces are available for those children who are not within the catchment, and then the application of reserved places allows us to make the decisions on where we can and can't grant placing requests. So it is a whole exercise based around the staffing standard for our schools that gets us to that position. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Okay with that, Provost?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'd be grateful, Karen, if you can maybe just come back to me on the detail of the earlier point, perhaps in an email later on. That would be really helpful.
Thank you. Billy Ahern.
Thank you very much. My question is a follow-on from Councillor Cuthbert's regarding intensive support provision. And I'd just like to thank some officers for the discussions they've been having offline with Councillor Cuthbert and I, which are around intensive support provision and other provisions. But I was slightly concerned about the fact that that is not taken into account when you look at the numbers. I mean, we're just building a new high school which doesn't have an intensive support provision. We've got the high school in Kinross, which also doesn't have an intensive support provision. So how will you allocate, if a child needs intensive support provision, how do you allocate that? If there's no places at that school, are you saying that that's the intensive support provision in that school barred from somebody, or what? Because if you've got an area of Perth and Kinross that hasn't got that provision and they need to move to the school, how is that decided then? Do you look at the numbers that are available, or do you look at that independently?
Thank you, Billy Ahern. Sheena, please.
Billy Ahern, you'll be aware through the work that's underway in relation to the wider ASN transformation programme that's actually not just kicking off now, but we have been looking to develop that over a period of time. In terms of intensive support provisions, we have actually increased the number of intensive support provisions that there are across our secondary school estate. And you're right, there are not intensive support provisions in every single school at present. But intensive support provisions, we have an allocation across the totality of Perth and Kinross, and as Karen said earlier, decisions are made about allocations to those most appropriately through the ASN Transitions Panel, and that's how that is currently done. I'll invite Fiona in to maybe give you a wee bit more information in relation to that aspect and some others as well. But it would be fair to say that in terms of looking at how we best meet the growing and diverse and complex needs of children and young people in our schools through the work that we're undertaking in the ASN transformation programme, we will be taking into account exactly the kind of things that you've raised, but that won't be something that will happen very, very quickly. That's something that's going to need quite a period of time, and we see that the ASN transformation programme is actually one that's probably in its entirety, probably looking at a 5-year programme in its entirety. Thank you.
I'll just add very briefly to that just to give a clarity in terms of the number of intensive support provisions that we have. We've got 6 secondary level intensive support provisions and 9 primary stage intensive support provisions. So we the numbers that we have within that are obviously determined by the level of need. Almost all our provisions are full. And unfortunately, it does mean that for some young people, there isn't a need for them to be supported through transport to access that. So that's exactly really the driver in terms of the work that Sheena has outlined.
Just a quick follow up there. So you say we've got 6 provisions in secondary, 9 in primary. How do the numbers stack up? You've got enough provision in secondary for those coming through primary?
Our secondary provision, well, all of our primary provisions have either 1 or 2 classes. Our secondary provisions have a greater number of classes, some with 2, some with 3, some with 4 classes, so that we can absorb the number.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. It's the same thing. I mean, my understanding is that Octorado and Kinross don't have ISP provisions. Am I right in thinking that parents who are trying to get their kids into an ISP and requesting places like Bertha Park are being told, no, you need to go to Kinross High School in the case of Kinross? And basically, is that going to change soon, or is that set for now?
Not sure that is right, actually, but Sheena, perhaps you want to comment?
My understanding is that that's not the case. And the other thing that's probably important to restate is around that parents don't make a placing request for an intensive support provision. An allocation of a space in intensive support provision is made through the ASN, this Additional Support Needs Transitions Panel, not by parents. So it's not, you would make a placing request for a named school, but you cannot make a placing request for an intensive support provision. And I think that's important that distinction is made. Thank you.
If I might come back on that, in terms of the transition panel, my understanding is that that's supposed to meet a year prior to a pupil with additional support needs being considered, but it's actually happening almost 2 or 3 months before the child's due to move to another school. Is that correct? I mean, are we that far behind?
The ASN transition panel meets as regularly as it needs to be, so that it's not that it's an annual event, that there are frequent meetings of that. I think what you might be talking about, Councillor Cuthbert, is what we call enhanced transition support. And so for enhanced transition support for some young people, for example, who might be in primary 7 moving into secondary school, we would expect to see a period of enhanced transition take place over a period of time. We also know that some enhanced transition work actually takes place over a longer period of time than that time as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. I do think that our intensive support provision is an ongoing and crucial question and conversation to have. I think we're getting slightly away from this paper probably. So, however, nonetheless, it's a valid conversation to have. But at this point, I'm going to move this paper. I'm just going to be very brief in moving it. I think it's a very difficult piece of work, I suspect, to get the staff and strategy and maximising places and reserved places spot on. There is a little bit of scientific guesswork in it, but I think we do it pretty well. I'm saying we, it's the royal we, as Sheena alludes to. I think Karen and her team do this really well. I think 95% of primary children get their first choice primary school, and 99% of secondary school children get their first choice of secondary school, which I think is to be commended. So thank you, Karen. I will formally move the report and ask for Councillor Carr to second it.
I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Comments, please? If there are no comments, can we agree with the report? Thank you very much. That concludes our business today. Thank you very much, everyone. I think there was some legitimate scrutiny and hard question in there. I think that's absolutely right. I must say that I do appreciate the respectful way in which we all ask and answer those questions is appreciated. So thanks, everyone.